All right, we're there. Hey, I don't. The network just booted us. Chris was locking up a little bit, and then I was fine, and all of a sudden the network just removed me. It was a network error more than anything. So big apologies to everybody who was online and following us. But we'll follow through and continue with the win lesson really quick because the file's a save, and we won't lose too much. But without that, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, jump right in.
Okay, so we were talking about wind speed and then why effective wind is important because the effective wind is the actual effect on your bullet. How easy it is to get wind speed and how important it is to get the angle correct. So here I just, while we were down and doing that, I redrew the sheet or the diagram of the clock. And so let's say you pulled up a 12-mile-an-hour wind. If your angle was fuzzy and it's just kind of coming from that
It
way.
doesn't like the sheet. Put the board down. Put the board down. It's freezing on that.
Oh,
That's making it's like your camera now just slowed down and went into slow motion mode. So it either you can't move or something. Like your camera settings are
okay.
wrong. But as soon as you brought the board up, you started doing the frozen thing. So just do that and talk to the board.
Okay. So essentially, an example out here, a pretty average wind is going to be about 12 miles an hour. And if you get the angle off between 130 and 2, you can see that 1 is 7.5, 130 is 9, and 2 is between 10 and 11. We're using these numbers. And so that's a pretty substantial difference in miles per hour, considering that every mile per hour is a tenth of drift in the distances that we shoot. That moves your budget potentially and most likely off the plate in a direction. And so the difference between 1 and 130 is a mile and a half, but the difference between 1 and 2 is 2.5 to 3.5 miles per hour. So I think that's very important. And if you just took the speed and went for it, we're talking about even bigger differences of 4.5, 3, and between 2 and 3 miles an hour. 4.5 is between 4/10 and 5/10 of error. And so paying attention to that angle can help refine to the correct wind zone, which will allow you to shoot. And so knowing the effective wind will allow anybody with a wind table or data to determine what their hold is going to be. Of course, we've got more to that, but just that by itself will improve people's ability to predict what the wind is going to be to a more accurate level. And we've tested shooters at this simply by putting a target that's painted, a big target, and a mark on the center and a ruler on it, and measured where their impacts are off from center when they do hit the plate. And we can see that shooters, when they come to us, are often within about 3 to 4 miles an hour. And after really paying attention to the angle, are usually within 2 miles an hour. So they've cut their error in half, paying attention to that wind angle and applying the correct effective wind to their wind holds.
And that's part of
And
I was going to say what our targets measuring, we measure that. If you look at some of the pictures I put up of the targets, we'll put an X on there and we're looking at the X and Y, your elevation and your windage from dead center of that plate. As well, we have a big plate on the bottom to catch your misses and to catch your mistakes and your bad wind calls. But then we have a 1 MOA plate that's a halo above. And what it is we want you to translate that wind call to the smallest plate possible. So that's
right,
part of the work we're doing to look at how people make wind calls, where mistakes are made, and what can be done to correct them.
right. Now, the way we use the Kestrel, the way I advocate a lot of people to use the Kestrel is to convert it to an effective wind and enter it from 3 or 9 o'clock as the effective wind speed. So rather than the number the Kestrel tells you, if it's coming from the right, set it to 3 and convert it to the effective wind. That'll take out errors in jump and other calculated problems that we see with angle and jump and stuff like that. and it'll tell you what the wind hold would be for your bullet if that's what you go on. I don't think that's a great way to go, but to start with, if you don't know what to hold after figuring out the effective wind, convert it to 9 or 3 o'clock, put in the effective wind as the average, and that'll be a good starting place for your wind hold for your bullet. Now, as you learn more, there are ways to already understand the drift of your bullet with wind. And now it's usually referred to as the gun number. And when I started digging back through gun number stuff, um, Emil had said that back in the F class world, it was referred to as the British method at the AMU. So the AMU referred to it as the British method, uh, and they would hold certain distances for their caliber based on their
Yeah, then
caliber.
we had the rule of nines, and then I called it. It was always told to me as the BC method because it matched the
Mhm.
BC. But the nine moved as well. But the British method is an MOA method. If you look up the British method, it's going to give you the 10 mile an hour to the yard lines for 308. So I always understood the British method to be MOA at 10 miles an hour for your yard line. And I have it
And but
somewhere.
it did trace back to the G1 BC,
Yes,
and
because
so
the
I think it's
G1,
cool when all that marries.
the G1 with a 308 and you do your gun number is 10. And so today, if you do it, it's 9. You know what as far
Mhm.
as an MOA, but the gun number was in MOA, it was 10. And then it went to 100-yard line increments, and that's where that came in. So because we're in mills and it's a little different now, that's what reduces it down to the more usable numbers that we use. But yeah, for sure the gun number has a history that goes back in time.
So if you just want to grab your ammo and figure out what your gun number is, look at the G1 value and that first digit. That's going to be point 0.3, point 0.4, point 0.5, point 0.6, whatever that G1 first digit is. For a 308, it's point 0.4 something. It's a 4 mile an hour gun. And what that means is 4 miles an hour is going to move it a tenth of a mil or a third of an inch at 400 yards. So that might sound complicated. And to make it easier, it takes time. But the idea of your gun number fixes a mile per hour value to a distance and a reticle movement that wind speed is going to be. So if you have a 4 mile an hour gun, your truing range is 400 yards. If you have a 5 mile an hour gun, your truing range is 500 yards. And if you have a 6 mile an hour gun, your truing range is 600 yards. But at those distances, each of those rifles, 1 mile an hour is going to move it a tenth. And so if you measure somebody at that distance, how good is their wind calling? Then you measure it in tenths from center, and that'll cumulatively tell you the variance of their wind calling. So it's a really good system because you can put them at their distance, have them measure the wind, and see how close they were to that simply using speed, angle, and the reticle measurements. And in MOA, it would be at 400 yards, 500 yards, 600 yards, but it's going to move at a third of an inch, a third of an MOA at those distances. So it's a little bit more complicated. The angular measurements of mills makes it very easy. And so I guess it helps to back up a little bit and talk about mills. Mills is not metric. So this isn't a war of metric versus imperial. 1 mil at whatever the unit that you're measuring, it's a thousandth of. So at 1,000 yards, a mil is 1 yard. At 1,000 meters, a mil is 1 meter. At 1,000 feet, a mil is 1 foot. So you can apply it in the same way logically using any system of measurement. And so I think that's helpful to know that you could do it in yards using mils and it doesn't conflict. You don't have to use it in meters. You just have to know that it's the unit that you're using. So if at 400 yards, a 4 mile an hour gun, the bullet moves a tenth more every mile per hour that you have as an increase. It's a great distance to train somebody's capability. And so, but it also leads to the ability to measure it a little bit better because the subtensions are in tenths. So if you hold dead center at that distance and shoot, the drift where the bullet hits, that's the miles per hour that the wind, that's the effective wind spelled out on your reticle. So if you have a 5 mile an hour gun and it's going right to left, and let's say you have a plate that's a certain number of tenths wide, let's say just imaginary, it's a mil wide at 500 yards, and you know it's going right to left. So you hold right on that right edge, the upwind side, knowing that there's no way it's going to hit there because the only way to do it is to have no wind. If you measure in tenths how far that bullet hit to the left, that is the miles per hour of the wind. And so communicating in miles per hour is helpful, but you also need to know the miles per hour of your gun. Because if I hit with a 7 mile an hour gun and Frank's shooting a 4 mile an hour gun, if I tell him I hold, he's going to miss because he needs more. But if I tell him in miles per hour, he can use the appropriate subtension and he'll understand. And so it's important when you're doing this to back up and build that framework of we communicate in miles per hour, not holds, because our reticle is telling us miles per hour, and somebody else's rifle might behave differently. And so if you give them the wrong unit, it's not going to work right. But if you give him miles per hour, it's going to hit. And Frank has a video that we made at Cameo, and we were shooting a 5 and an 8, and Frank shot his 8 mile an hour gun. He said the miles per hour, and I shot the 5 mile an hour gun, and we both hit the center of the target. And that's for the same reason. We knew the distance, we knew our elevation, we didn't know the wind speed. He shot, got a wind speed, told me the wind speed. I converted it to my rifle, and we were both able to hit the target.
Which rifle did you have? A 308 or did you have a 6.5?
I had a heavy 6.5, so it was a 5 mile an hour.
And
A
I
5 mile.
had
It
a
was shooting a
PRC.
156,
Right.
and he was shooting a PRC.
I was shooting a PRC. So Chris was shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor, and I was shooting a 6.5 PRC. 200 feet per second different, give or take a minute. Rifle system. So
Yeah.
that's
So if he said, "Oh, I held 4 tenths," I probably would have missed the plate.
yeah.
And it was a pretty small plate. I think it was a 1 MOA or something. So um, if he said, "Oh, I held 4 tenths," not going to happen. But he said, "I held a certain miles an hour." We both hit the center of the plate. Everything was good. So it works. And so if you have mills, it'll allow you to determine the exact miles per hour. And if you have MOA, there's probably a trick, but I can't think of it off the top of my head other than counting up in thirds at that distance. But we've taken it a few steps further. But that's the background on the gun number. The gun number is helpful to know. You can get it from the G1. You can play with your Kestrel and just find whatever the distance is where 1 mile an hour moves at a tenth. And if you convert it all to effective wind and put it in at 3 and 9, it'll tell you what your hold is going to be. But the craft wind system, like the quick wind, has taken it a few steps further, taken advantage of the mill reticle, and the fact that it breaks it down into tenths allows us to turn it into percentages of a number really well. And we already do it. So before you start rolling your eyes and thinking I'm turning to metric, if you have $1 and we break it into 4 parts, you have 4 quarters. If you break it in half, it's a 50 cents each. So 25, 50, 75 isn't very hard. And 25% of a number isn't very hard to calculate. And so we've taken distance and wind and combined them in a way where we can think about things in quarters. So if I say 400 yards, half of that is 2. 3/4 of that, or 75%, is 300. A quarter of that is 100. And so it might be different. So it might come across a little bit slow at first, but the learning curve is very steep. And if you can think in quarters, and people our age remember when there were quarters, that's not terribly difficult to do. And those of us that are familiar with an analog clock can think in 30-minute intervals as angles. We could also say 12:30 is 15 degrees, 1 is 30 degrees. And so you can do it in degrees, but it's faster to just use the clock in 30 minutes and think 25, 50, 75, 90, 95, 100. If you put in the cosine, 75 isn't 75, it's like 71. Close. But I've never seen somebody able to shoot the difference between 71 and 75. And I can calculate 75% faster than I can calculate 71%. So you just go with it.
Yeah.
You just can't shoot the difference. My justification for that is do the craft drill, shoot one shot from 4 different positions, and then repeat that again from 4 different positions, and then repeat that again. And most people's groups are much bigger than their error of wind. Oh, look at that. I love the craft, rifle craft.
Craft drill.
Um, if you use wind speed and angle to get an effective wind, most shooters that we've measured bring it down to that 2 mile an hour variance. 2 mile an hour variance translated to gun number is 2/10. Most people, in fact, no people that I've ever seen or heard of can shoot a craft drill that's 2/10 around the point of aim. So most of the error is coming from a shooter's shooting, which is why I think it's good to learn the wind. It's good to know your capability and realize that your capability is probably what's holding you back more than the wind. Nevertheless, they go hand in hand. So we need to know both. But if you can bring it down to a 2/10 variance, but you shoot a 4/10 group, the 4/10 group is your limiting factor. We call it the low hanging fruit. I would work on your fundamentals. It's probably that, not your load. The reason I say it's probably not your load is most likely you've shot a group that's smaller than an inch with it, and standard deviation doesn't matter inside of 1 second time of flight. It's the group size. So the error is coming from the shooter fundamentally. But let's get back to wind because it is Wind Wednesday, not Fundamental Friday, well, if that is ever going to exist. Um, if you do wind speed angle, convert it to effective wind, you're good. But make sure you input the effective wind to 3 or 9, not the angle that you got it from. And then understanding your gun number will help you determine the error that you have in your wind reading, but it will also help you shoot at other distances. So I'm going to explain the percent of the distance. We can cut it in the future because what I'm going to talk about now might take some people some weird head banging on the table to figure out, but it's what I call the percentage of the distance. 400 yards, what I call the distance is 400 or zero point 0.4. So you would divide it by 1,000. But if I say 400 and you're thinking percent of the distance, think 0.4. 500, 0.5, 600, 0.6, 700, 0.7. At the wind speed of your gun number, it's pretty straightforward. If you shoot a 4 mile an hour gun at 400 yards and you hold 0.4, the wind is 4 miles an hour. If you shoot 500 yards, it's going to be 0.5, and 600 yards is going to be 0.6, and it'll go out like that. So if I say shoot the distance, but you don't have a plate at 400 yards, you know the wind speed is your gun number. If so, the distance at 700 is 0.7, and that percentage is going to go. So if you hold a target at 500 yards and you hold a mil, that's double the distance. Double 5.5 is 1. You held 1 is double the distance. So if I tell you, okay, now shoot 7, double of 7 is 14, so it's going to be 1.4 mils. Double 1 is going to be 0.2. And so not only does it apply at your distance, but it extrapolates out. And you don't want to double your gun number. So a 4 mile an hour gun after 8, you have to start adding because of other effects. And that's where higher gun numbers often help extend the effective range there and the trick. But when we talk about shooting the distance, We're talking about whatever the yardage, convert it to a decimal. If Frank says there's a target at 550 yards, I can't hold 0.55, but I could get close to 0.55, and that's going to be good. And that's a relationship that will tell you something about any target in that line on that azimuth in those wind conditions. To share that, you would think about what that means compared to your gun number. So if I say hold the distance and you have a 7-mile-an-hour gun, you know it's 7 miles an hour. But if Frank has a 4-mile-an-hour gun, that's 1 3/4 the distance. So whatever the distance is inside of 900, it's going to be 1 3/4 whatever that distance is, which sounds a little bit crazy. But if it's 800 yards, um, it's going to be 8 plus 6, um, so 1.4 mils, and you're going to be within a tenth, and your shooting error is going to be more than that. So shooting the distance not only tells you something about your gun number, but it also tells you about the wind for you without having to consult a Kestrel. And so that's a quick way to shoot. If you shoot a target and you made a bad wind call, but you saw where it hit in the reticle and you know the distance, you don't even need to know the wind speed. If I shoot 500 yards and it hit at 0.7, I'm going to say it's 1.5 the distance. So the speed, the effective wind is 1.5 your gun number. And it's going to be that on that azimuth to 900 yards. And so that's the introductory way that we talk about quick wind and the wind system, is not thinking about it in the ways that we've been taught, but trying to wrap our heads around this new system of whatever the distance, we can calculate 25, 50, 75,
Yeah, it
the
maps the whole
distance.
field from your position.
Mhm,
So if you have, other than until you're changing your angle, right? So if you're shooting a
mhm,
lane that doesn't have a wide angle to it, it's just a straight in front of your lane. You're at a stage in a match. You're shooting a target in front of you. They don't have a very wide field, so they laned the system. Well, regardless of how many targets they put in there before you walk up, you have numbers because the
mhm,
angle's not changing. It's not until you change the angle is when you have to start thinking about the other value. So while you're shooting that lane, it's there, and the more
yeah.
you shoot it, like Chris says, and you get your impacts and pay attention to those impacts, you're constantly fine tuning the wind call,
hmm
you know?
And the angular stuff applies to that. It's just a little bit harder. So, first step is to get familiar with one line and the percentage relationships of distance. But a lot of shooters understand that if you're shooting 500, 600, 700 yards, that usually means whatever you're going to do, you're going to add a tenth as you go out, unless the wind is super strong and you might add 2/10 each jump, but there's a relationship linearly
Right.
to that distance. And then, right, if you're going to go in angles, which we can have a separate talk about, it adds to that. But until you can do the percentage and think about it in terms of what does that mean for this distance, it's harder to go left and right. But if I say it's double the distance, then at 800 yards, I'm going to hold 1.6. So I don't need to think about it, look at my Kestrel. I don't need to worry too much. And if I have to convert it to miles per hour, that means it's double my gun number for the effective wind speed.
Right.
Um,
And then the
so I think that,
reality too, just real quick, Chris, because the reality is like with the sticker in the win number there, that right there can replace a ballistic calculator. It's analog. It'll work. You don't
Mhm,
you don't need a calculator to do the math. You don't need a
no.
calculator to look at this win. So once you start using this system, you start looking at targets in the wind different. Okay.
hmm
You're looking at that target and you're going, okay, that's 600 yards. Yep, I'm going to hold my 3.2. And then you go, okay, that one's 680. Yeah, it's 4.0. Well, why,
hmm
what says 4.0 for that? Well, it's 8 tenths more than, yard line. It's 80 yards more than 600. If my 600's 3.2, if I go 80 yards, it's a tenth of mil per tenth of yard line. So I already know 680, add 8/10 onto my 600-yard dope. Then you can also translate what Chris is saying with this wind speed. All right, you're going to add a tenth up there because you're jumping closer to the 7. So if you're 6, it told you to hold this. The angle didn't change. The target just got a little farther away. You know you're going to add the extra bit for the wind because you're
Mhm.
jumping into the next yard line, 100-yard line.
Totally, totally. And we're talking about like within 15 degrees, so 30 minutes on a clock. It works really well. Your calculator might be a little bit off, but I would argue for you to shoot the difference between the calculator and this method. And I think that most shooters can't shoot the
Well,
difference. So
and
you'll be able to get on a 1 MOA plate.
on the
So that's
calculator
good.
or the Kestrel, you read the wind at you and you do everything you're supposed to do. Then you go and you shoot. And we've had this on our range all the time. And our range is pretty nice wind wise. We don't have a lot of weird terrain that messes with it. So we'll go and shoot. And I'll go, okay, I read that as an 8. Read it as an 8, shoot the plate. It's a 12. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, believe the bullet, right? It's a 12. And so you did everything right. You read the Kestrel at your position. You played the numbers. You did everything you're supposed to do. But the wind told you I'm not 8, I'm 12 at that. This method is
Mhm.
gonna tell you that. This method's going to show you that kind of stuff. And
Right.
if you're adapt to say, I missed, adjust, recorrect, I hit. Now, the fact that you walk away with the number you hit with, that basically opens up the answer to the range because you hit.
hmm Right. You shoot, you miss, but you see it in your reticle. You see it in your reticle. But now, what if you have to shoot a different target and you have all the wrong things written down? It gives you a way to say, okay, well, it doesn't matter because I know what the wind is. And so you might get 90% impacts, but 90% is a heck of a lot better than just missing everything because you wrote the wrong thing down. And it's
Yeah,
analog,
your arm board
and
is
I
for
love
8.
analog.
Your arm board is for 8. Your first plate says I'm 12. Well, now you should be translating everything to 12. So you're going to add that
Right.
410 to all those numbers, and it shouldn't be, oh shoot, what do I do now? It told you what to do. It's like
hmm
cheating on a
Yeah,
test.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a 4 mile an hour gun, it's not double the distance, it's triple the distance. Shoot triple the distance for that line, and you're good. You also know it's not 8 miles an hour, it's 12. So the angular adjustments you can convert really quickly. And I think that, we've done it for so long that it comes
Mhm.
naturally, but I can appreciate that it's
Chris,
uncomfortable, but it's also quick to learn and increase that learning curve because the guys that we've taught to use this within a few months have gapped like 50 places at matches.
um,
So it really does work.
yeah, go real quick. Andrew's he's been to our range and took classes. He has a variation of your method that's on Sniper's Hide. You should go look at it. Kind of works both. You guys were almost dual tracking a little bit, like with the unfolding on the wind side of it. So there's an article that Andrew wrote that's on the Hide that almost it in my mind it's just another way explaining of what we're doing, but it's
Mhm.
very very similar. And I'm pretty sure Andrew doesn't go into percentage, but he's unfolding numbers and it's the same numbers. He just looks at it a slightly different way. So maybe that connects to a person's brain just a little bit different than percentage distance. So you should take
Yeah,
a look at
because
Andrew's method.
right, because essentially it's algebraic, and which means that you can, if if you know two numbers, you could figure out all the other ones. And so some people think about it one way, so they figure out these things and then figure this out. And what he's done is say, well, it's easier for me to figure these out and then figure this out.
Yes.
It's all the same thing, but there's different ways to look at it, which is why at first I said it's like a triangle. I might prefer to start here and here, but if you prefer to start here and here, once you see how it works, you'll gravitate towards a method that becomes easier for you to do. And when that becomes easier, you become more accurate. So there isn't a right way to do it. As long as you kind of appreciate what's happening, you'll say, well, this is easier for me. I'm going to do it this way. Well, it's a hell of a lot better than just staring at a computer because
Yeah.
that takes a lot of time. Your batteries can die. And the bullet's telling you reality, and the inputs on a machine are telling you the outputs of the data that you put in. And that data could be wrong to begin with. And so this will give you reality. And then how do you run with reality? There's a lot of ways to use that same data to work with the way your mind thinks. But I think in quarters, he thinks in gun number divided by, there's calculations. It's all the same thing, but you have to jump in before you figure out what swimming stroke feels best to you. But it really is all working with the same stuff, which is wind speed, angle, distance,
In the gun number, yeah.
and then, yeah, how you digest it.
And real quick too,
So,
I was gonna I'm gonna lose it, and I think I may have just spaced. Oh no, I got it. So what I always tell people with this, the solution to hit the target is like getting the answer 4. How many
mhm,
ways can you get the number 4? Right? We can go 1 plus 3, 2 plus 2, 0 plus 4, 5 minus 1. You know what I mean? There's a million different ways to equal 4.
mhm,
So if it works in your brain a certain way to get to 4, good, as long as you're putting the elements together and you come up with 4. But that's kind
mhm.
of what we're looking for.
Right. If we're out at the range and we don't have a Kestrel or any way to determine the miles per hour, if I shoot around the distance of my rifle, even within 200 yards, I can tell you what the miles per hour is of the
Yeah.
wind. So it takes one shot. So I could sacrifice one shot for all the information I need to shoot. So if you're good at that stuff, analog, you can do a lot of things. Just like with gravity ballistics being analog, you don't have to chronograph, you don't have to do all sorts of garbage. You could shoot, you could say, oh, I needed this, my bullet hit at this subtension. That's the distance that it hit at, and work backwards. Or you could say, I hit here, but now my next target is there. I'm going to multiply it by this factor. You don't really need all that stuff once you understand that it's a way of figuring out all the stuff. Like, what's the distance? I don't know. Oh, it hit at 4 mils. That's my 700-yard data. The target's at 700 yards. Oh, how far over was the bullet? From zero. Oh, it was this. This is the miles per hour. You got distance and wind speed you could feed to somebody. Uh, it's a, I think it's cool in itself because it allows you to explore what we do with rifles in a different way that can teach you
Yeah,
what we take
workings
for
of it, the
granted.
mechanism of the math. And like, I'll do this too because we do the gravity ballistics and it only goes out to 1,000, right? So we stopped it at 1,000. We called 1,000 100%. So when you want to go beyond it, I'll go to someone, I'll say, okay, what was your difference in your math on that last one? And they'll say, okay, it was 1.2. So between 9 and 1,000, the difference was 1.2 mils. And it's like, okay, I want to shoot the next one. Yeah, put 1.4 on or go 1.4
Mhm,
more. You know what I mean? Because you went 1.2
mhm,
between 9 and 1,000. So if you're going to go 1,000 between 1,100, go 1.4. Then maybe go
mhm,
1.7, from 11 to 12. But there's a
mhm,
pattern. It's pattern recognition. And because we've reduced the numbers down to such small amounts, and it's one of the reasons we don't like MOA. I don't want to use 36. You know what I mean? I'm going to use 6. Right?
mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. And it just
Mhm.
makes it easier for us to operate with this third grade math. And once your brain kind of connects it, it's like being back in school again. It just goes, okay, okay, okay. And it rolls through.
Yeah. Right. And then you realize, oh, all these elements I could figure out with these other ones. Like, I know the wind speed, I know all this stuff, but I don't know the distance. Well, shoot around and you'll figure it out. So if there's 5 targets, 2 shots each, I'm pretty confident I'm gonna get 90% just throwing the first one because everything else I could figure out from that one bullet.
Yeah, it's the
And
it's the
so I
T
could tell
pose.
you.
We have the video up. I could put up later. The T-post, right? You got a nice T-post with a bunch of dirt underneath it. You don't know anything. Center on the T-post. Take the shot. When it goes up in the dirt, flies. Measure from the T-post to where the dirt flied. You got an answer. You know what I mean? And
Right.
like Chris said, one shot.
But you're not just taking, oh, I saw that and I moved it. You're taking the number and now you can apply it to more targets rather than, okay, I just fixed that. But what are you going to do on the next target? Well, you're going to have to go back to the T post. But if you think about it, it just told you the percent of the distance. It's going to be the same on these other targets.
Yeah.
So it requires a little bit of thought. Like, okay, yeah, you got the reflex of I made the correction. But if that's where you stop, you're missing the real like treasure. And the real treasure is it just told you all of your wind holds. Can you take that and carry it to other targets? Now your hit percentage just went way up. So
Right.
I think that's really valuable. And, you know, if it doesn't take long to take a shot, follow up, or take a shot at something completely off the target and follow up. You know, we're talking about seconds, but whether you extract what the actual wind, effective wind is or not, has to do with whether you're aware of that's what you're seeing. And that's what we're trying to get people to think about. Be aware that it's telling you effective wind. And can you carry that effective wind to other ranges? Well, that just requires recognizing it, practicing it just a little. And it's all practice that you could do while you're driving your car. Just think about quarters and percentages and
Yeah. Well,
distances.
and here's the thing, man. We're working all of this to simplify it, reinforce the shooter himself, simplify this math down, because we're past all the voodoo stuff. There is no voodoo, and we don't need some shaman out there telling you he had, doing wind god things and telling you, I got the voodoo answer. Dude, the voodoo, there is no voodoo. It's just straight math. And there's no mystery to that. So once the math is opened up to you and unfolds, the voodoo falls away. How did he do that?
Right.
Well, he knows the math.
Mhm.
It's, science is magic until you know what the science is. And that's all this is. It's not magic how that guy hit the target. It's probably experience, but it also, he understands the math. And once you understand that math, all the kind of silliness just drops.
Right. And I always think about like, all the movies out now are about the apocalypse or the world ended and we're grabbing rifles and we're just picking them up off the ground. And I think, gosh, gravity ballistics and quick wind is how you would do that. You would just pick up whatever that rifle is, either check it's zero, right, or not, just assume it's zero or whatever, and then you just take one shot at distance, and you know the
Yeah.
percent of the
I mean,
distance, and you're like, all right,
if it was a bolt gun and say it's a 308, like Chris says, if it's a 308, if I can get one shot at 400, 500, I now know the gun. I know what the drop
Right.
is. Is that a 3.0? Is that a 2.8? Where's the drop at 500 for that plate at 5, right? I'm going to say, okay, this is the win call for this what I have. So once I see that drop in the middle, the ends become easy.
Like it would be a cool stage at like a sniper match. Like here's a random rifle. You know, you're going to be scored on how fast you can zero it and give us an accurate dope card. And really, you could do that in 2 shots.
Yeah.
You confirm it zero, or you shoot a shot on paper and you measure the distance that it's off, dial it, take a shot at any distance, and then calculate with gravity ballistics your dope card. You could do that in less than 60 seconds, probably. Um, and you're good to go.
We could do it. Well, we
You
should
know,
shoot the video because we never did. We got to go do the sweet tooth too. Remember, we were going to do how hard it, and we moved all those plates for the army guys, so we have bigger plates closer. We need to do the sweet tooth with no sights on the AR and see how effective just holding the rail on somebody. Because all the apocalypse, movies, half of them don't have sights on their ARs.
Or
And
they're backwards, yeah. But they like get center mass between the eye shots with no scopes. And you're like, what? But yeah, it would be awesome to do
and
that. But
but
it would also be cool to
we
say
can
like,
totally take a rifle and give someone like here is a random. I'll even just put the scope on it. You know what I mean? Let's put like
yeah,
here's this mount it. I'll take a GDI or something, and I'll just make
yeah.
sure it's on paper. We'll do one shot on paper. We'll fix that. And then we'll do one shot on steel or two shots on steel, whatever you want to use. And we'll create a dope card with it. That would be a nice little video for
And
us.
then you're right, and then separate it and say, how accurate was their dope card? Let's see. And then we could measure the distances. Because you could
Yeah.
like put on a Halloween costume like, oh, here's a dead orc with a sniper rifle,
We
or a
just
dead
got
alien with a sniper rifle.
Xfinity says
Right?
there's a problem with the internet. So there's been an
Oh,
issue with the internet. That's why it kicked us off earlier, guys. I just got a text from my Xfinity account said, "We see you have a problem in your area. We're out fixing it now." So we picked a day that had a problem on the internet. Sorry about that.
right, right.
Got kicked
But
off
John Wick runs out of ammo and he throws his guns down and grabs a rifle from
up the
somebody.
stairs, right? Up the
Okay,
stairs,
cool.
up everybody's gun.
Yeah, yeah. So you grab a rifle and a bolt gun. What a bolt gun gives you is time and opportunity. So, but how much time does it give you? Well, you just grabbed it off a yakuza or a orc or an alien. I need to know two things: is it zeroed? And then I need to know how far it drops anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and I could back calculate it with gravity ballistics. I don't need a chronograph. I don't need a ballistic calculator. I need I might need a calculator. So maybe shooters are going to start carrying those
Casio watch.
calculator watches again at Casio, where you're like, okay, what's one, 2.4 of whatever I held. But the truth is, you need two shots to do that, assuming that your first shot on paper at 100
Is pretty
got
good.
the
Yeah.
paper.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's got to get the paper, but you can bore sight onto paper first round. But that'll add time. But bore sighting, like you should be on paper after you bore sight.
Yeah.
So but after that, it just takes one shot at distance. Bam, you're good. You got a dope card. It might not be perfect, but
Minute a man.
if or minute of alien or orc or
Or
whatever,
whatever
like
it is, right, right. Well,
if we're
although
shooting
Skinny Bob,
IPSC,
we may not, you might not hit Skinny Bob. That guy's only like 3 foot tall, and he's really small, but his head's big. So you hope you can get Skinny Bob in the head, but his body's kind of tiny.
but if we put IPSC to 1,000 and you took two shots and from that made a dope card, um, dialed your zero, you would have to hold everything, but you should be able to say the percent of the distance, your dope at any yard line, and we can confirm that with where did it hit. And if it hit, on the IPSC, we would consider that apocalypse movie capable.
Gold, right? That's Apocalypse Gold right there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Now, without a scope, like if it's just a rail,
yeah,
that's gonna be harder, because you're gonna be Kentucky windage randomness, but it would still be fun to do, right?
yeah, for
Because
sure.
you could look at the case and go, oh, this is a federal 175. I know that's a 4 mile an hour gun. Okay, you're good with the wind. Uh, so a little experience with some rifles of shooting different bullets. But if
You know
somebody
what? That
grabs an
would be
AK,
neat
they might be like,
too.
well, gosh, I don't know, but
Situation
yeah,
two: put a 168 down and a 175 down. Which one's which?
that's true. Yeah, you're like, oh, go back to the
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
how good are your scales? But anyway, I think it would be cool because if we're talking about just the art of marksmanship, the art of being a rifleman, all that stuff plays a part in it. It's just not good to be like, well, I'm only good in my discipline. Like that's awesome, but that's not necessarily the badge of a rifleman. And so, Sniper's Hide's good about saying everybody's welcome regardless of your interest. Your interests are awesome, but they're all distilled aspects of a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, look, if you want to do well in a movie, here's what you're going to need. And we're going to have some flexibility. But I think Craft Wind and Gravity Ballistics would allow you to be movie capable. But how much movie capable are you? We're going to have to make a video.
Yeah, well, I definitely think we'll go out and make that video. That'll be fun. And real quick for the people listening out there, they do say, I don't know if there's more than one version, but they do say the skinny bob is real. And I don't know if somebody added in different words to the answers, but if you can find the original skinny bob video, they say that's real. That's my UFO conspiracy for the moment. Oh, I got another
I
implant.
wouldn't. I wouldn't want bolt guns if we're fighting UFOs, though. So
No, bolt gun ain't gonna work. Maybe 338. We might need something bigger. So big cal might be okay. You start punching holes in the UFO from far away. I don't know how well it works. It's like throwing rounds through a Connex box with electronics in it. You
I mean,
know.
if we could get whatever we want, I want a 50 with Ralphus rounds and stuff like
Well,
that.
we
But
got to get to
um,
Texas because I know where there's a whole bunch of Ralphus we can access. But yeah, maybe I want to put holes through the UFO. But I don't know if they're bulletproof. Maybe that's like so high polished and tensile, the shit's bulletproof because it can fly, and if it hits space,
dragon breath,
yeah,
dragon breath drones.
mm-hmm, that would be super cool. But no, there's a lot of good stuff we can do to demonstrate some of this, and we just wanted to come out for Win Wednesday. We're pretty good here, Chris. I don't know if you had to leave at. Did you have to go pick anybody up at 3? Because it's
Yeah. What? Oh shit. Fuck. Okay. Yep. Gotta go.
bye. So sorry about that. Chris has to go pick up things, but no, thanks everybody for being on, and we'll do this some more now that, like I said, now it was Xfinity kicked me off. Sorry, my internet was bad, and Xfinity was having a problem, so apologies for getting kicked off. But we're back on now, and everything should be good. But thanks for listening. Head over to Hide TV and check this out, and we'll be bringing more of these to you because it's really easy. Other than technical difficulties of the world. Our infrastructure sucks. But cheers now.